On today's show, the NCAA season is underway, and we're looking at some early standouts. We'll look at some veterans and the 2024 and 2025 NHL draft classes and how they're performing on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalakash, QMJHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down the NCAA standouts from the early season openers here. The NCAA season is underway. There's a ton of action going on across the United States there in college hockey. So in the first segment, we'll look at some standout veterans, including Isaac Howard, Jacob Fowler, Trey Augustine, and the likes. And then in the second segment, we'll look at the 2024 NHL draftees, Michael Hage, Cole Eiserman, Cole Hutson, and Zeev Buium. And then in the final segment, we'll look at the 2025 NHL draft eligibles that are starting off their season and hoping to stand out and become top draft eligibles this year. James Hagens is playing for Boston College, Dakoda Rhéaume-Mullen, Logan Hensler, those guys. We'll talk about all of them in a final segment here. But before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get up to $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with the standout veterans in the NCAA. Isaac Howard's off to a torrid start. He's been playing really, really well for Michigan State. Put up a point a game last year, but this season, through a couple games, he's been a real standout prospect, right?
Absolutely, he has. Through 3 games with Michigan State University, he scored 3 goals and 5 points. And the 5'11", 190-pound left winger has just been off to a great start. He's finally coming into his own in terms of his goal-scoring ability at the NCAA level, which has always been kind of the knock with him since making the jump to college hockey. And he's definitely going to be the offensive dynamo in that Michigan State lineup. And I mean, we've been talking about him a decent amount these past couple of weeks since the NCAA season started to get rolling. And he's just been very, very solid in every viewing that we've logged so far.
Absolutely. Very, very good prospect of the Tampa Bay Lightning, and he's still kind of figuring out the tactical, structural aspect of hockey. He's not there yet. He's very much still an all-skill guy. He's a great shooter for such a decent playmaker with great hands, and he's Mr. Showtime. He's a show-off, and he loves it. You need some of those guys on your team. You can't have a whole team of them, but 1 or 2 of them per team. It spices things up, it adds some excitement, and it sells seats. Let's move on to Jacob Fowler here, who had a banger of a start for Boston College, a shutout and a 3-0 win over Isaac Howard's Michigan State Spartans. Played fantastically for them, showed a bit more athleticism than we've been used to for him. Fowler's a bit more stocky, a bit of a more heavy goaltender, so that pure athleticism wasn't always there in his game. But in that game against Michigan State, it was so much athleticism to work with there. On top of the puck tracking, the intelligence, the reactions, the composure that we've gotten used to with Jacob Fowler, there was an extra layer of being able to go post, being able to sprawl out, make a kick save, that kind of stuff. Added a bunch of really interesting elements to his projection and his hopes with the Montreal Canadiens. I think when I'm looking at Jacob Fowler, I'm starting to see less and less weaknesses, less and less areas, fewer and fewer areas where I can point to and go, okay, this is something that might hold him back at the NHL level. He's becoming a very complete and a very, very good goaltender for Boston College and for the Montreal Canadiens one day, hopefully. Let's talk about Trey Augustine as well, because that's always been kind of a debate, Fowler and Augustine, right? These guys have been going toe-to-toe for the past year, for the past couple of years. Augustine in his draft year was playing for the NTDP. Jacob Fowler won the Clark Cup with the Youngstown Phantoms. The year after that, Boston College versus Michigan State. Obviously, Fowler playing on Boston College and Jacob Fowler playing on Michigan State. And they still faced off, and Fowler still came out on top. I'm wondering if we got a three-peat of Jacob Fowler just coming out on top again here, given that at the World Juniors, both of them were invited, and Augustine got the starting role, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, in the season start, like that shutout that we're talking about with Jacob Fowler, it came against Trey Augustine's team in Michigan State. So Fowler won that duel in that 3-0 victory for Boston College. We're going to see at the World Juniors, like Trey Augustine is the known commodity for USA hockey. He was the one that was with the NTDP. He was the one who started last year at the World Juniors and really outperformed Jacob Fowler in the crease in that tournament. But Jacob Fowler is a player that, in my opinion, has probably edged slightly ahead of Trey Augustine in his development in this past year. Has a lot more support as well playing with Boston College than Augustine does with Michigan State, certainly. But it's definitely a pretty tight race. These are also two goaltenders with pretty similar profiles in terms of size. Fowler is 6'2". Augustine is 6'1". Fowler, as you mentioned, is a lot heavier. He's about 30 pounds heavier than Augustine is. But these are both very intelligent, very composed goaltenders that play their best hockey on the biggest stages. And we've seen this for the last 3 years for both of these guys. And I really do believe that both of these goaltenders are primary contenders to be starters down the road for their respective organizations. I think that Augustine has a bit more competition with Sebastian Cossa in the crease than Jacob Fowler does in the Montreal system, for instance. Though, I mean, Samuel Montembeau's been off to a great start. Caden Primo's still very young, and Jakub Dobesh has progressed very, very nicely in the past year in his development as well. But these are two very interesting goaltending prospects that will be going head-to-head repeatedly this season in the NCAA, and it's definitely a very fun storyline to keep an eye on. But we have another Boston College player here that we want to mention apart from Jacob Fowler, and that is Gabe Perreault, who should have probably been drafted higher than he went in that 2023 NHL draft class at 23rd overall to the New York Rangers. He's gotten off to a solid start with an assist in that opening game for Boston College. And I mean, last season, he scored 19 goals and 60 points in 36 games as an NCAA freshman. And he's going to continue to provide a lot of offensive punch alongside James Hagens and Ryan Leonard on that top line. James Hagens is probably going to be elevated to the top line eventually. He didn't start there just yet. He was playing a second line role to start the season, but I really do think that's the line that will be producing offense for most of this year for Boston College. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt at this point. And I think James Hagens is kind of being pegged in as a playmaker, but he's a real dual threat scorer. He's got a really good shot. And I think that'll work really well with what Gabe Perreault brings to the game. Perreault's a really, really good playmaker, loves to play pucks inside, loves to throw pucks at the slot whenever he can. That worked well with Ryan Leonard and, it worked well with Ryan Leonard last year and with Will Smith, who were both also dual threat scorers. So having James Hagens replace Will Smith on that top line eventually, it's going to happen someday. It's just a matter of time. But yeah, having him on that line, having him on that line with those two is just gonna help him even further in terms of creating points for Boston College. But let's move on to Jack Devine, I'll remind you, a 7th round pick of the Florida Panthers, a fantastic pickup from them. And he's been off to a torrid start as well for Denver again. He's got 6 points in his first 2 games for the Denver University Broncos and has been performing incredibly well for them. He's still your kind of high pace, high energy playmaker, inside driven. He's able to drop the shoulder, go to the net when he needs to. He's not as physically inclined. Basically, that's kind of the main area that kind of limits his game: the lack of physicality and the lack of pure foot speed. But the willingness that he has, the energy that he brings to the game, and the willingness he has to drive to the net, to bring defenders with him, to create havoc, really helps him. And on the power play, he's just zipping passes around, making himself a focal point of playmaking triangles and all that stuff. So there's a lot to work with there with Jack Devine. He's a great playmaker, and he's showing it again in the NCAA in his hopefully final year in events. In the NCAA, he was playing in the NCAA as a rookie. Didn't really impress that much. Wasn't really standing out as much as he did last year, and especially not so far this year. So great progression from a 7th rounder who probably should have been picked in the 3rd or 4th round at most in the NHL draft. But it is what it is with Jack Devine. These guys always kind of tend to slip down the boards. But lastly, a player who had a really, really good first game in the NCAA, Matthew Wood. Let's talk about him real quick before we close things off on this first segment.
Yeah, so he was an off-season transfer. So he played 2 seasons with the University of Connecticut, including his draft year, but has now switched over to the University of Minnesota, and he started off on a heater with 3 assists in that opening game against the Air Force Academy. So obviously not at the highest level of competition here that we're talking about there, but still a player that I really like. He's highly intelligent, really dangerous goal scorer, really deft playmaker and puck handler as well. The skating has always been the big knock on his game, but he's a player that Nashville invested a 15th overall pick in that 2023 NHL draft, and he was always quite raw in his draft year, so he's always going to be a player that's going to need a couple of years to really develop into a potential NHL piece. But with his frame at 6'4", 205 pounds, with that intelligence, with those offensive tools, I really think this is going to be a big breakout campaign for Matt Wood at the NCAA level. But that wraps up this first segment for us. In the next one, we're going to be looking at a bunch of the 2024 drafted players that are starting off in the NCAA this season. And also Zeev Buium, who already has a pretty decent NCAA season under his belt already going into this one. But first, a quick message from our sponsors over at Hey NFL fans, you can start the season off big with a massive return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. Whether you want to take your swings on the NFL, or maybe your preference with football is European football, and maybe you're a big Champions League fan. Whatever it floats your boat in terms of the football world, FanDuel has something for you. Or maybe you're not a football fan in any capacity and you prefer tennis or golf, or, I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, maybe hockey is your sport of choice. Whatever it may be, FanDuel has something for every sports fan out there. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets when you get started and place your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com.
Alrighty, so let's move on to our second segment here, where we talk about the 2024 NHL drafted prospects who are starting off their seasons in the NCAA, whether they're freshmen in the cases of Michael Hage, Cole Eiserman, Cole Hutson, or if we're talking about a sophomore in Zeev Buium who had a fantastic season last year. There are a lot of 2024s that are worth watching, or in some cases who haven't even started playing yet. For example, EJ Emery hasn't played a game yet, but that should be coming fairly soon. Those kinds of examples. But let's focus first and foremost on Michael Hage, because Michael Hage has basically taken over the Michigan Wolverines, has basically made that team his. It's been fantastic to watch so far. Dynamic, active, elusive. Last I saw, was it 5 points in 2 games or 5 points in 3 games? I've lost count at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it was 5 points in 3 games, so not quite as good as that mark would be in 2 games. But I mean, he has 2 goals, 3 assists, and a lot of those points have been incredibly dynamic, where he's able to leverage his speed, his skill, and even access the middle to a degree that we didn't really see as much last season in the USHL. He's been a lot more middle driven already this season, and you can kind of see already kind of the things that may have been worked on a little bit over the summer with input from the Montreal Canadiens scouting staff, because that's something that Habs prospects routinely improve after being drafted by the organization in terms of physical mechanics, leverage mechanics, getting to the middle of the ice, getting to dangerous areas, keeping stick on the ice when they're near the net front. And those small details have definitely been apparent so far for Michael Hage. And as you mentioned, he has made that team his own. He's been driving the offense. He's been producing at a massive clip. He leads the team in scoring with those 5 points. There's only one other player that has more than 2 points so far this season, and that's Garrett Shifsky, who has 4 goals in those 3 games. But it really is Michael Hage who is leading the charge here offensively, and doing so with flair. He's a very entertaining player to watch as well.
Absolutely, and there's just so much skill in his game overall. He's such a dynamic crossover skater in the neutral zone. He loves to pick up speed down, uphill, and just attack at defenders' feet, push them backwards, make them force defenders to make bad decisions. That's kind of the motto of Hage's game, and that's continued. But he's also shown those one-touch playmaking plays, those give and goes, the little details that work in the NHL. Because in the NHL, there isn't as big of a speed differential between the slowest and the fastest NHLer as there is, for example, in the NCAA or in junior or that kind of stuff. So what you need to do instead is use changes of speed one-touch plays, quick pace abilities, rather than using pure explosive dynamic skating. And that's what we're seeing a bit more from Hage, is manipulating pace, using his feet in ways where he's fooling defenders rather than just outracing them to spots. And that's been really interesting to watch. But let's talk about Cole Eiserman for a second. Now, we did only get one goal in one game for Boston University, but it was your patented Cole Eiserman howitzer. It was your typical, just absolute bomb of a shot. Interestingly enough, he did get 17 penalty minutes in his first game.
Yeah.
So a 2, 5, and a 10 to start things off. I didn't manage to get that sequence specifically. I wasn't able to watch that game live or see exactly what happened there, but a 2, 5, and a 10 is pretty harsh. And
it was after the play, and he got involved in a kerfuffle, which ended up with him. I'm not sure if it was a punch or a cross check or a smack to the head of a player. But either way, it was head driven and after the whistle, and I think rather merited those penalty minutes. But clearly getting involved physically, even if it is after the whistle, and he's going to be a really important piece for Boston University this season, a team that will be trying to keep up offensively with Boston College, despite having lost their big offensive punch from last season with Lane Hutson and Macklin Celebrini. But with Cole Eiserman, with Cole Hutson as well, there's a lot more offensive flair that's been entering here as freshmen into the lineup. And Cole Hutson's also gotten off to an identical start on the stat sheet, with exception the penalty minutes, of course, with a goal in that one game for Boston University. He did pick up 2 penalty minutes, so he's still 15 behind his teammate there. But Cole Hutson is a player that gets involved offensively a bunch, so effective in transition and gaining the zone with control, and is a really stabilizing force in the offensive zone. And whenever there is, like, for instance, a puck battle or contested possession and a teammate needs to secure possession, it's always with a pass to Cole Hutson at the blue line, who's able to put the puck in a much safer or also more dangerous place to create offense from. So he's going to be a player that I'm going to be very curious to track this season with Boston University. But he's not going to be the premier offensive left shot defenseman in the NCAA this season, because that has to be Zeev Buium again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Zeev Buium is off to a torrid start in the NCAA, and this is nothing new from Zeev Buium. He was possibly the best defenseman on Denver University last year in his draft year.
Oh, possibly? Definitely. He was the best defenseman in the entire NCAA last season, in my opinion.
Listen, points are one thing. I will give some respect to his brother Shai, who was really kind of the bona fide top pair defenseman on that team. But Zeev was very, very, very good, and worked his way up to NHL standards, in my opinion, fairly quickly. I thought he could have made the team this season with Minnesota if they had a need for a left shot defenseman who can move the puck. And I think long term his fit with Brock Faber is quite literally perfect. But in terms of what we're going to get from Zeev Buium this season, I'm hoping we get a bit more kind of full-time top pair minutes. I'm talking 25, 26, 27 minutes, because that's kind of what he saw in the playoffs for Denver, but that wasn't consistent throughout the regular season. I'm hoping we see that 25, 26, 27 minutes on a regular basis. He gets that ice time consistently and works his way up to being the best defenseman in the NCAA, because that's what I think he is, and that's what I think he could be this season officially when all is said and done. He's got the skill for it. Now, it really does depend on, especially with Artem Levshinov having been signed by Chicago playing the AHL, there isn't as much. Exactly. There isn't as much competition for him this year, but still, I think he can hold that title by the horns and kind of run away with it. But yeah, Zeev Buium's fantastic. I think, for a 6-foot defenseman, he gets, he can make do with what he does defensively in a really good way. Defends a rush, makes great plays. He's a really complete defenseman, right? There's no real area of his game you can point at and say this is an issue, right?
Not really. He's dynamic with the puck on his stick. Maybe the skating ability would be one thing, but his edge work's fantastic. He's incredibly agile and escapable from in tight. It's more just that separation gear that lacks a little bit, which will be something that I might look at with his development if I were Minnesota, of maybe investing in like power skating lessons for Zeev Buium. I think that would bring him to an extra level as well, in terms of being able to recover on play, but also being able to just jump in on the rush and perhaps also take opposition off guard and really push the pace offensively a bit more. But at that point, we're nitpicking a little bit if we're going in on like individual skills and small components of overall physical tools. So overall, as you mentioned, very complete player. But yeah, there's a lot of players here that we're going to be keeping an eye on among that 2024 draft class. But in the next segment, we're going to be looking one more year ahead at the 2025 draft class, highlighted by James Hagens, of course. But first, a quick message from our sponsors.
All right, guys, sometimes intimate moments can happen spontaneously, and you always want to be ready when those moments happen. So, HIMS provides access to treatments that help you stay performing in the bedroom and help you last longer, giving you the boost of confidence so you can be ready whenever the mood strikes. HIMS is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. You can get access to affordable sexual health treatments like chewable hard mints, Viagra, Cialis, their generics for up to 95% cheaper than they go on the market. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits, and it doesn't take that much of your time. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's hims.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. Again, that's hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if those treatments are appropriate. Restrictions apply. See your website for details and important safety information. Subscription is required, and price varies based on product and subscription plan. Alrighty, so let's close things off here with our final segment, looking at the 2025 NHL draft eligibles playing in the NCAA this season, and there are, to my count, 6 of them. The only one we won't really talk about today is Shane Van Sage, because I mean, Michigan State's played a couple of games and he hasn't really stood out in any major way, but there's a decent amount of other guys that we need to focus on here. Let's start off with James Hagens, who's been really good so far through one game for Boston College. He's starting the season on their second line, but I think it's just a matter of time before he takes that first line spot between Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault. Talk me through what you saw from his game in that performance and what we kind of expect from him moving forward in terms of his freshman season in the NCAA.
I mean, yeah, he's been really, really good in that one game. I mean, he's so dynamic. He's an undersized centerman at 5'10", but a fantastic skater, a really dynamic goal scorer and playmaker. He's a true dual threat in the offensive zone. The handling is certainly like closer to that level as well than average. And he's definitely a player that is going to be driving a lot of offense for Boston College and also getting a lot of support in that facet while playing with guys like Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard, as you mentioned. But in that opening game, he started on the second line against Michigan State, but he did play 18 minutes and 40 seconds. So second line minute with a bit of an asterisk, and it was a really, really solid start. He generated a 1.53 expected goals for on the ice and only 0.61 against. Did really well to also stifle chances against playing down the middle for Boston College, and just overall, he's a player that is able to impact the game in a variety of ways. Despite being undersized, he's quite capable in supporting defensive play rather than perhaps driving defensive play. He's not going to be a Selke winner at the NHL level, but he does put in the work, and he's very intelligent with his defensive positioning. And overall, this is a player that I think the hope is that he can kind of score 50 plus points this season for Boston College. I mean, we saw guys like Macklin Celebrini score 60 plus last season. I don't think that's necessarily a fair expectation here, but he'll be definitely getting a boost while playing with guys of the caliber of Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault. But while he is certainly the highlight of the draft class among NCAA talents here, he's not the only interesting player. And I wanted to talk about a couple more defensemen here. But first, I want to talk about the one other undersized forward that we wanted to cover, and that's Cullen Potter with Arizona State University, who has already played 3 games this season. and he's logged a goal and an assist for 2 points. And this is a really, really pacey, dynamic, skilled player. Despite being 5'9" and 168 pounds, he's taken the step to the NCAA earlier than he had to. He was eligible to still play with the U18s this season if he so desired, but he clearly wanted to make that leap a bit earlier. And it's been a strong start so far, and definitely a good thing for him to be able to work on, especially the physical involvement and the physical tools and just the intensity and pace of NCAA hockey, because that was the big knock on him in his D-1 season.
Yeah, I think the earlier these prospects make the jump to the NCAA, the better, just because they're facing a level of competition that is older, that is bigger, that is stronger, that is more experienced. I'd rather have a player play, for example, his draft was 1 year in the NCAA and score 5 points in 30 games, rather than see them, stay in the USHL and just rip it up for 80 points in 50 games. My personal preference is to see them play in the NCAA earlier. Why? Well, because those older defensemen are going to pressure them in ways that are more NHL-esque, right? They're going to put them in situations that are more NHL adjacent, which I think is the sooner you get exposed to these things at the youngest age you can, the better. And there's a quite drastic difference structurally, tactically, physically between the NCAA and the USHL, and that drastic difference. The sooner you make that jump, the quicker you're able to acclimate, and the more NHL translatable your game gets. So that's my hope with Cullen Potter, is that those issues with his game physically, tactically, structurally kind of develop over time. And I'm pretty sure he's in the best spot he can be with ASU, who can afford to play him bigger minutes than BC or BU or Michigan State or those kinds of
which he has so far. Like in the 2 games that we have data for so far, among the 3 that he's played, he's logged 16 minutes and 49 seconds in one, and then 20 minutes and 8 seconds in the other. So he's been playing a big role with Arizona State, having really good expected goal impacts as well, and obviously also playing an impact on the score sheet and spending a lot of time with the puck on his stick, which is exactly what we want to see from him this season.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to some defensemen. There are some very interesting ones this season in the NCAA that are draft eligible. We'll start off with Logan Hensler, who's pretty much, among the batch of NCAA defensemen that we're going to talk about, was pretty much the most by default top 10 guy at the start of the year, especially given his draft -2 performances. He looked like a legitimate top 3, top 4 talent early on in his draft -2. I'd say by the start of his draft -1, that kind of dissipated a bit. His draft -1 was pretty, for lack of better word, boring. He didn't really make a ton of plays, was very muted. And at least so far this season, he's been playing with the University of Wisconsin, which personally I don't know if that's the best program to develop daring kind of hockey from Hensler, which was what made him so special in his draft -2. But still, he's got an assist in his first game. He looked pretty good in that game. But there's still some development runway left. He's 6'2", 200 pounds, a right shot defenseman. That's already a hot commodity in the NHL.
Great skater.
Fantastic skater. And the passing abilities there in flashes. There are some sequences where he'll make a really good pass through a lane, that kind of stuff, but there's still some progression left in his game. Not necessarily a player who thinks the game at a really, really advanced level, but he could get there someday, right?
Yeah, like he makes simple plays very effectively. It's more just those advanced plays to create offense that just hasn't quite been there so far. Like it was there in flashes, certainly in his D-2. But one of the big reasons that he was so hyped up in his D-2 season was because of this presence of so much polish in the simple aspects of the game and also those that physical maturity. He's a fantastic skater. Overall, his physical like mechanics and tools are really, really good, whether it be passing mechanics, even shooting mechanics. He's very like polished as a whole. But that runway is a bit of a question mark for me if there isn't that implementation of a level of dare on puck and a desire to try new things and explore his game. I think exploration is really the one thing that's been lacking in his game in the last year and a half, perhaps, of his development. And that's something that we definitely want to see from him this season. But in that first game against Nebraska Omaha, he played 19 minutes for the University of Wisconsin and played a really solid game overall. He was a +2, was just pretty well involved. I mean, being on the ice for 2 of the 3 goals that Wisconsin scored, and also getting an assist along the way. Pretty solid all around for Hensler, but we want to see a lot more of that dare in his game. But the last 2 that we want to talk about here are A bit different, considering that one is a really plus level skater and the other one is probably the worst skater that we ranked in our first round for elite prospects for the
It's a problem.
October top 32 ranking. It's not the prettiest. So let's start with him. Let's start with Sascha Boumedienne here, a player with Boston University, a 6'2", 183-pound left shot defenseman who thinks the game at an advanced level, has some really bright flashes in breakouts especially, and played a really solid season overall for the Youngstown Phantoms last year as a D-2, and has now made the leap to the NCAA with BU. But talk me through his game a little bit and how he compensates for the really, really choppy stride mechanics.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting that we mentioned those two last because they're really kind of polar opposites in their approach defensively. Boumedienne's a lot more about processing, about proactive positioning. He's a defenseman who likes to move early, and sometimes it comes back to bite him in the butt. Sometimes he'll make an early read, which ends up with a lucky bounce going the other way, and then he's fully flat-footed and isn't able to catch up. But when he does, when the play's straightforward, he reads incredibly well. The other aspect of compensating for his lack of foot speed is his really intelligent breakout passing and playmaking abilities. He doesn't keep the puck on his stick for long, and he knows the puck is going to move way faster than he can, so he just moves it to the right spots and then kind of waits for plays to develop and processes them intelligently. That's kind of the crux of Boumedienne's offensive game. Defensively, though, it is definitely a setback. And my issue's always been, I can't name you a well below average skater like him among defensemen who's made the NHL and been effective for a consistent and long amount of time, unless they've either improved their skating or they're really elite defensive thinkers. I don't think Boumedienne's an elite defensive thinker. He's a good one. He's an above average one for sure, but not the type of player that you think, okay, this guy can he can think his way out of any problem. That's not Boumedienne's game. So I think the skating will need to improve to make him an effective NHLer. Do you agree?
And that said, I mean, we've seen Boston University really develop the skating of their blue liners very effectively in the past couple of seasons. I mean, Lane Hutson especially, like the improvement that we've seen in his mobility between being drafted and now playing NHL minutes with the Habs has been massive. So I think BU is a great program for Boumedienne. But I mean, Dakoda Rhéaume-Mullen is a fantastic skater. And let's just quickly wrap up here with him. He's a Michigan State blue liner, 6 feet, 181 pounds, a bit undersized for defenseman for sure. But with the way he skates and also just being a very simple and straightforward thinker of the game, he's a player that definitely prioritizes possession and retention of possession. He's had some nice flashes of breakout passing, but there's been a level of inconsistency with that. But last season with the NTDP, he played a lot with the U18, so he played up in age group as well, and was just very, very effective all year long, playing bottom 4 minutes for the program in his D-1. And I think he's a player that we'll see if he actually solidifies himself as a first-round talent at the end of the day, but either way, he's going to be a really effective piece for the University of Michigan. And he's also a profile player that the University of Michigan has really appreciated having in their depth chart in recent seasons, and that they would have been missing out on if they would not have added him into the fold this season. So curious to see how his minutes progress this year as well, because he's been starting off in a bit more of a sheltered role. But I think that wraps up the episode, right, Hattie?
It does, absolutely. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode and who you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our future shows as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of October. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.